The key takeaways from NFL Week 3. That is what we're talking about today on the RotoViz Overtime podcast. It's myself, Colm Kelly. I'm joined by Shawn Siegele. Shawn, in some new surroundings over there in Kansas City. So big steps taken in the Siegele household over the last couple of days for people watching on the video side. Interesting, different background. It's always nice to see the different backgrounds of the Shawn Siegele experience. But Shawn, I've written down here the twilight zone of field goals, block field goals, and interceptions. And I realize there's a couple of games that you haven't yet to see. Fumbles is another thing you could put in. There was a kind of a weird week where it felt like some of these games, either in the same game or in multiple different games, you're like, is that a replay? Has that happened again? So it was quite a fascinating week. And we will dive into some of the positive stuff in just a moment. We did have a couple of tough injuries this week. We had the Najee Harris injury, the non-contact Achilles situation with James Conner with the looks to be ankle injury that he's going to require surgery on. CeeDee Lamb goes out early for the Dallas Cowboys. Colson Loveland, had a highlight play, but then also injured his hip and went out in the second quarter. So there's a lot of injuries, Shawn, over the course of the last kind of 24 hours. Tyrone Tracy as well, missing time. We'll talk about Cam Skattebo in a moment, but that also factors into how that played out. But I thought it was an interesting week where we're going to have a lot of stuff to kind of work through. And after week 2, we looked into what was real, what wasn't real. And this week, there's some of the stuff that we talked about that feels like it's more pointing in that it is a real thing, conversation. There's some parts too that you're like, was week 2 a mirage? So we're going to dive into that a little bit further as well. But when you were watching week 3, taking in the action, how did you feel overall? I did have a few listeners reaching out to say any updates on the FFPC Main Event team, our teams, you and Ben's teams, and how they go. And I was like, we'll update them, of course, the course of the season. Now, I did also mention that our team kicked off 0-2. We had a heartbreaking Monday Night Football loss by, I believe it was 1.1 points, with Keenan Allen coming back to catches at the end. And Keenan Allen again this week having a strong performance, getting in the end zone. We may touch on that when we get to the Chargers game. But I don't know if you'd have a chance to look, Shawn. We are already victors with Jameson Williams to play this week. And it was one of those where that's a Bo Nix-led team. It's a team that, we did start Matthew Golden on again this week, even though if we had sat him last week, we would have got the job done. So there was a couple of areas.
Keeps coming back to me with Matthew Golden. I'm like, if you're feeling it,
the only thing was Matthew Golden versus Jerry Jeudy, and I did get the right end of it, but by 3 points. So it didn't really matter in the grand scheme. But we are going to be 1-2, and we are starting that comeback, Shawn, because we're excited about the team, but it was just unfortunate the way things had kicked off. But you do want to get to that 0-3 marker at the start of the season. But Shawn, NFL Week 3, how are you feeling as we sit here on Monday waiting, which should be a pretty fun Monday Night Football game here coming up?
Yeah, I'm excited for that. The biggest takeaway from me, and this is something we talk about a lot, right? It's not like it's a huge surprise that, good quarterback play and good coaching simultaneously allows certain teams to pull away while everyone else looks terrible. But this was a week where that type of element, the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and it's always interesting to see who those teams are going to be. And even occasionally you get teams that are probably in that haves group. I mean, the Denver Broncos are probably in the haves group despite the inability to hit on those big plays, and yet they're 1-2. They've lost to the Colts. The Colts look like an unstoppable juggernaut. They've lost to the Chargers. The Chargers look very good, although the Broncos defense, they put the team in position to win that game. And, Bo Nix with those long connections to Marvin Mims, Cortland Sutton, the connections that did not happen, they didn't come through and win that. But you have games, or you have the situation with the Colts where Shane Steichen is like, I told you guys I didn't even need a great quarterback, just someone with some experience who can distribute the ball. And we'll basically never punt. Now, Colm, they did punt in this game, but they still scored 41 points and had the backups in, right? So if that's your first punt and that's your situation, you're just overwhelming the field. And again, they've played the Broncos, and we just saw what the Broncos defense did to Justin Herbert, which again, wasn't enough to win the game, but was actually very impressive. You have a situation, and I haven't gotten a chance to watch this one yet. And you've kind of suggested it really wasn't Carson Wentz, but you get a player like a Carson Wentz in a game where, Wentz is bad, But if you have quarterbacks with some experience who can run an offense and the coordinator is fantastic, and I certainly think that we have that with Kevin O'Connell, then, I mean, you really get going, and suddenly your team looks like a Super Bowl contender. That's been the tricky part for the Vikings. It's a tricky part for all of these teams, right? And it's that process you kind of have to go through where if you have a young QB and he could potentially be the guy for 15 years, then you have to give him that grace, and you certainly have to give him that runway to try and develop. But man, it's tough when your team is already there at every other position. So it'll be interesting to track how some of those things develop. Colm, the injuries were a bummer. You mentioned the FFPC teams. One of the ones that was doing the best, I had the good fortune. It's always just such a blast to draft with the ship chasing guys. Drafted a team with Pat and Pete. That team actually did have a tough loss at one point, but was the high scorer in its league. And so anytime that you've got the most points, you're feeling pretty good. That was a CD Lamb team. To have him go out without scoring, essentially without scoring, those are tough. We had plenty of guys who didn't really feel like they scored this week. It's been a weird start to the year. I basically don't feel like anybody's scoring. And anytime that you watch these games and people aren't scoring, you're thinking, well, at least my opponents aren't scoring either. I'll be interested to see what the final fallout from this week has been. Almost all of the teams that I drafted by myself started 2-0, which some of those hadn't even scored that many points. So there's always a luck component to it. The teams I drafted with Ben are doing well. I really like our team, and I expected to go on a big run. And one of the things is just that, across the portfolio, have a ton of Cam Skattebo, have a ton of Bashal Tootin. All of those guys are one play away from being in the same shape that Tyrone Tracy now in. Obviously, James Conner have a pretty decent amount of Trey Benson. When you see Conner go down, knowing his injury history, that's just so tough. It does unlock guys that you have on your own roster, but it's tough, right? We always try and reiterate that with Zero RB, we're not rooting for injuries, but they will happen. You want to have the right players. Trey Benson seems like he's very good. Maybe he will really get going. It's been positives and negatives, right? One of the things that we wrote about a lot with the early big gorilla things is that you want to have some exposure to the guys with some mobility, the guys who could be second-year breakout candidates. I certainly wish I had a lot more Caleb Williams. And again, that one is so fun, I think, precisely because there were so many positive things about it, including the fact that at some point Luther Burden was going to factor in. Now, the big play is kind of a gimmicky play. It's a trick play. But Luther Burden is going to be a star. And when they have both Burden and Odunze going there, but the issue there is just as training camp, Caleb Williams looks awful. Take Caleb Williams off. They can't even start a play. They can't even get lined up. And it's if you can turn it, and it's tough because some of the information that we get out of training camp does matter and does point you in the right direction. But Colm, certainly, if you can mostly turn your brain off to training camp, you're going to be better because we have such a wealth of information about what the players are like. And for Chicago, you're talking about what all these different players are like around him. You're talking about the guy who's going to be coordinating it. Now, again, we also know, and this is something that was important and something the Lions really wanted to hammer home last week when they put up 52 on the Bears, is that it wasn't just Ben Johnson. And it probably wasn't even mainly Ben Johnson with the Lions. But I think the Caleb Williams thing has been fun because you do continue to see him look terrible at times. But that combination of incredible arm talent, very, very plus mobility. It's the plus mobility more than anything else that made him the 101 in Dynasty. And then all of these weapons, Ben Johnson willing to call some fun plays. If nothing else, Colm, for me, the takeaway from week 3 is that you can be bad in a lot of ways if the person calling the offense, the person who built the offense and structured the offense, knows what they're doing. Those teams have room to make mistakes, to miss throws, to do different things like that. Whereas the teams that have no clue, and certainly a team like the Houston Texans, absolutely no clue. Those teams don't have any margin at all. and they can have a broken coverage that gives a CJ Stroud 50-yard touchdown and still don't score any points and don't win a game. So it's coordinators along with QBs that, have some experience. And again, I mean, Caleb Williams, not necessarily the experience. It was so fun to watch, or so interesting to watch, this massive gap open up in week 3. And it's been open, but just continue. We're like, this small group of teams has a chance. Everyone else is running in place or running backward, running blindfolded, and that football is gross.
There was a number of teams this week in particular. I know you haven't got through all the games, but there was some of the games that were just so short-handed in terms of what they were trying to do, what they were trying to achieve, and how they failed in so many spectacular ways. And I would include my Green Bay Packers in the way they failed spectacularly against the Cleveland Browns. We may get to that later in the show. Also, Shawn mentioned the Houston Texans. We're going to do a kind of a panic meter show on the Wednesday edition, where we're going to talk about players and teams and how high of a level we are in terms of panicking for the fantasy football season after 3 games, because 3 games in the fantasy season is a large enough sample size for that concern to be there. But Shawn has really had a nice kind of soliloquy, or he's voiced out a paragraph there that's going to set us up perfectly for this show, because we're going to try and talk about the Bears game, Skattebo, Jonathan Taylor, and you kind of were talking there about how the coordinator obviously for the Vikings had the quarterback that is now with the Seattle Seahawks, who had a lot of concerns about coming into the season. But Carson Wentz, I thought, was an upgrade on what McCarthy has offered this season so far and that one. But Shawn, I will also spoil it that the Minnesota Vikings put up 31 points on defense as a DST this week. So, one of the high scorers of the entire week is going to be that defense. But let's go into the Bears, because the question I kind of have with the Bears offense here is it is good to see the steps forward, the development. Luther Burden having that 65-yard touchdown, spectacular play on the flea flicker, was almost like it was a flea flicker where it looked like DeAndre Swift was about to get tackled before he tosses the ball back. But awesome throw, awesome reception. We get 298 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, no sacks going the way of Caleb Williams. I think he would say the best game of his career to date at this point. But when we look at the Cowboys and what they are doing over the last couple of weeks, they give up 24 to the Eagles, but they give up 37 last week to the Giants, 31 to the Bears this week. It's going to be interesting to see when we look at this game in 4 weeks' time, if this was like Caleb Williams and this offense like breaking out and becoming, let's say, what the Lions have been over the last couple of seasons. Is this the early days of that? Or is this the fact that the Cowboys cannot cover any passes that are deep, and their defense is having a lot of issues already this season? So a really strong performance, but that's kind of my kind of guidance towards you here, with Luther Burden 3 for 101 and a touchdown. Rome Odunze looking good again, has 7 targets with 3 for 62 and a touchdown. Colson Loveland, just the 1 reception on 3 targets for 31. I mentioned he left that one early. Cole Kmet then later, and this one gets in the end zone. DJ Moore kind of gets the touchdown to potentially save that day, but becoming a little bit of a forgotten man in this offense. He does go 4 for 21 on a touchdown of 5 targets. The running game, Shawn, not really that positive here for the Bears. DeAndre Swift had some, I thought, nice runs, but he had a long of 11, 13 for 33. So it's not really getting the job done. 6 for 16 for Kyle Monangi. Well, that's my question coming back to you. Is this a mirage because they faced the Dallas Cowboys, or is this, the Bears moving forward here?
I think it's a combination of both, right? We have gotten to see, again, just this sort of extraordinary arm talent from Williams, just flash and flash and flash.
He can make throws that there's only a certain amount of QBs out there like making, particularly with some of the releases and how much velocity he's getting on the ball.
And, you even go back to that flea flicker where, Patrick Mahomes has connected down the field with Tyquan Thornton a few times at this point in the young season. That's encouraging.
It seemed like this week, Shawn, the only player he could connect with was Tyquan Thornton, like 50 yards downfield. That was the Chiefs' one passing option.
Colm, those Chiefs receivers. You have all of these teams where you're like, okay, the Bills, for example. The Bills are running out low-end starters. And if you're a Buffalo fan and your guys are Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman and Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore, Dalton Kincaid, you're like, man, if we had like one high-end starter mean, they have a high-end starter-ish with James Cook, and that does matter. And, so at a certain point when you have Josh Allen, it's like, how much embarrassment of riches do you want when you also have to work on their side of the ball? And despite, succeeding at some of the really bad teams, we know that Buffalo can't stop good teams at all on defense. But there's a difference between having a bunch of low-end starters and what the Chiefs have, where you're talking about like low-end backups to like basically the entire offense being peopled with guys who should not be on NFL rosters. I mean, Hollywood Brown has a name, but probably should not be on an NFL roster. Travis Kelce should not be on an NFL roster. Tyquan Thornton probably should not be on an NFL roster. When we love Juju Smith-Schuster, should not in 2025 be on an NFL roster. Yeah, it makes it tough. You contrast that with this team we're talking about here in the Chicago. Well, my point there was when he throws that ball off to Luther Burden, you're like, I mean, that is what an NFL quarterback throwing a deep shot is supposed to look like. Whereas on the Sunday night broadcast, you get the call of, oh, that's a 70-yard pass down the field. A, it wasn't a 70-yard pass. B, it was like a punt. And I mean, we all love Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes is probably the greatest of all time. He is not throwing great deep balls. Those balls don't look good. The pass that Caleb Williams threw, I mean, you're like, that is the epitome of an NFL QB with an arm. It was gorgeous. And then Luther Burden hands out stretch. And again, the placement does matter, but with Luther Burden, when he's able to run under that and catch it out on his hands, a striking contrast to those Broncos players. Like, that ball is up there forever. Like, Bo Nix put arc on those balls. Marvin Mims, who is athletic, and then Cortland Sutton, who is okay. Stop dream sequencing it. You got to get out there and make that catch. What are you doing?
They're watching too much of Troy Franklin's, rookie season tape. They just have to be a couple of feet short. The Broncos at the minute, Shawn, with how those particular passes where they're like diving out stretch and it's just out of bounds, or not out of bounds, but out of range. It reminds me so much of that. I mentioned this like a couple of weeks, the Packers season 2 years ago, where like at the end of the season, they start hitting these plays and they beat the Cowboys on the road in the playoffs. But like prior to that, it felt like every play was just like going through their hands, going off their hands. And that feels like where we're at with the Broncos, but it's hard to know for sure if some of that's on Nix or if it's on the receivers. But the play here, I thought, by Williams was very impressive, and it will be interesting to see if they can do that. The other thing I would mention, like, he had no sacks in this game, but he's under pressure on a number of different plays, and he's got the ball out off platform and made some very impressive throws, and he had to do it without really any run game. Like, he has 5 for 12 in this himself, but I thought that the Bears looked extraordinary. There is a number of interceptions kind of in the fourth quarter. Joe Milton also came in for an interception for the Cowboys, 2 interceptions for like in the end zone as well for Dak Prescott. So he had some passes I'm sure he would like to have back. There's an interception though that also goes off George Pickens' hands, where like the ball is in his hands. He kind of tips it himself up in the air and it's intercepted. So he could have had a better day as well. And that was one that Pickens will be disappointed to see. But the Cowboys without Lamb were pretty depleted across the offense in terms of what they were trying to do. And that one,
too harsh on George Pickens when I say that this is a guy who has all of these red flags for work ethic and willingness to follow directions, blocking for his teammates, all of these types of things. He gets more or less what he wants. He gets traded away from the team that isn't even requiring him to do things, but the team he doesn't really care for. He goes to the Cowboys. You're in an offense that's willing to throw. You've got Dak Prescott. CeeDee Lamb goes out. You're now the focal point. And I mean, his effort level in this game, and maybe it's not effort, maybe it's just talent, but I mean, this was his chance to shine. And instead he's doing things like, lateraling these balls for interceptions. He scores a touchdown. He does okay from a fantasy perspective, especially in 2025's context, but he looked bad.
Yeah, I think I don't think I would put that one specifically on effort, and I agree with some of the concerns off the field. I would put that down to like purely concentration. I think like he's like switched off one way or another, or he's put his focus on like, I've caught it now, I'm just going to get the yards after the catch. Like, he's just mentally moved to the next step of that process, which isn't what you want to do when you're trying to mount a comeback. And create a turnover for the opponent. I will mention Jake Ferguson. He had 14 targets in the absence of CeeDee Lamb, 13 for 82 going his way. Shawn, moving
so that's
back,
like 1,000 premium points.
That is, yeah. It's a pretty. If you can get if you can get that from your tight end premium levels, that is very beneficial. The other side of that Chiefs game, Shawn, that we were kind of joking about a minute ago, the Chiefs win 22-9. The kind of only bright spot I would highlight here was Cam Skattebo. Unfortunately, Tyrone Tracy did get hurt, so that leads to more opportunities for Skattebo. Basically, the opening 2 drives in this game for the Giants were solely rushes or dump offs to both of the running backs. But then obviously we get Tyrone Tracy going out. So it leads to 8 targets for Skattebo, 6 for 61 there, 10 for 60 on the ground with a rushing touchdown. Malik Neighbors was kind of completely isolated in this, 7 targets with 2 for 13. The first reception coming in the fourth quarter. We get 4 targets to Wendell for 1 for 26. This game, Shawn, was an absolute mess from the Giants' perspective outside of what they got from Skattebo, really. Russell Wilson, 18 for 32, 162 interceptions. When we look at that Bears game, you're like, how good are the Cowboys defense? We know the answer is very bad because they got absolutely annihilated by Russell Wilson last week. And there was like that thing where like we come on here last week, we give them the credit for a tremendous performance, some tremendous throws. But this really felt like, the Cinderella, fairy tale where like it hit midnight when it got to overtime in that game last week. And Russell Wilson kind of turned back into a pumpkin in this situation. So we get a really bad performance. Like we get Neighbors also gets kind of not let up, but he gets a physical hit on an end zone shot where he has to turn into a defensive back himself to knock away what would have been another interception, then gets hit, he's out for a little bit. The interception, you're on about those plays from some of the other quarterbacks that like the wide receiver is kind of waiting on the ball. Like we have an interception here where Neighbors is at the back of the end zone when the ball gets in the defensive backs in front of him. He makes an easy interception, just another poor throw. I thought that like we're looking at, well, we give Wilson a hard time, but you touched on in the start about, do you want to put the young quarterback in there? And I think you might have been referencing like, do the Vikings have the best chance now with McCarthy or say a Wentz or an established veteran like a Daniel Jones? But with this particular one, you're like looking at it and you're like, do you want to put Jackson Dart into this mess of a season and like then he's taking the heat for it when we get another 6 weeks down the line and this team's like 1-8? Like that's the interesting conversation here that the Giants are going to have. But Russell Wilson, Shawn, there's a 4-down play sequence inside the 10 at the end of this game where he throws the ball away and it actually goes down the tunnel, and he takes a grounding penalty for that. So that's first down, loss of down, lose the yardage. Next one is a Russell Wilson scramble, a quarterback draw. I do not know why this was called, but goes forward for about 2 yards.
We had a couple of those in this game.
Shawn, this one was baffling.
Russell Wilson is in his late 30s.
This made no sense. And then he followed it up by 3rd and 4th down, just non-targeted passes out of the back of the end zone. Like
the 4th down pass, like 4th down to where there's really no downside. Like goes through the uprights.
Yeah. Did he get 3 points for that? Was that a field goal attempt?
I mean, maybe that they got 9.
It's like 4th down, put it between the uprights, and you get 3 points. That can be the one. But so the Giants are in a tough situation. But here, let's get back to the positives. Skattebo. This was a really strong performance. I thought that he kind of showcased a lot of his abilities in this one.
He did, and he continues to have that thing where, he's not going to have the straight line speed, and in an NFL environment, the defenders are so big and so fast that when they do get on you early, they're going to be able to pull you down. And someone who is visibly slow is going to occasionally have runs where you're like, yeah, that's a problem if you're not that athletic. But the short area quickness is there. The vision is there. And then once he gets moving at all, when you get that short area quickness and the vision, you can get a little bit into space, and then you can square up a defensive player who maybe isn't ready, and you've got that physicality. They're not really intangibles. These are key parts of a running back's skill set, where if you can make yourself small in space, but then you can deliver a hit, you can keep the legs driving, You have a nose for the end zone. And one of the things too, and probably it's just out there having fun, but you know that Skattebo is hearing all the time, like, why did they draft this guy? Why do people like him? He's not an NFL athlete. So you score that touchdown and you're like, I'm going to do a standing backflip.
Oh,
show people
I missed the whole premise of talking about Skattebo, Shawn. Skattebo does a backflip after his touchdown, and I'm like, wow, that's impressive. I was walking down the stairs this morning with my 1-year-old son, Shawn, and somehow I have, he wears this moisturizer because he has eczema, and I think he must have rubbed the step or something, but I'm walking down the steps with him, and I just it was as if there was a banana peel on the steps, and I just go zip away up in the air. So I slide down 3 steps. I am not joking. I thought I had done my Achilles after this one, but my toes are they're pretty black and blue. So I'm hoping there's no toe fractures.
Has your heart gone back to its normal speed yet?
My heart is okay, but more my glute, my butt, and my foot, they were in bad shape after this. But thankfully, where I was panicked was that my son would be hurt. He was fine. He was quite happy to walk around instantly, where I had to go and lay on the sofa. But Cam Skattebo is not the most athletic running back in the NFL. Hell of a lot better athlete than me. I don't think he's falling going down the stairs, Shawn.
So that falling down the stairs thing could definitely happen. I'm watching Skattebo, and I mean, the efficiency has been there for the most part, right? We know that the efficiency on running backs is going to bounce around. And it's one of the reasons why in the write-ups that I do midweek for the site, talk a lot about, well, here's where we are with the expected points. Here's where we are with fantasy points over expected. This is the longer view. This was a down game. This was an up game. But we do expect a player with this kind of talent to have more of one or the other, because the talent does matter. Where are they with evaded tackles? How are they doing in terms of within the context of their offense? Can both the running back and the offensive line, that combination, can they get some yards before contact, in part because those yards count, and in part because it's important to be able to get going. Some of these guys, there was a back last week, who was at minus 1.5 for the game. And you're like, yeah, even if you evade a bunch of tackles in the backfield there, it's going to be really hard to get going. But you get the 10 for 60, you get the 6 receptions for the 61 receiving yards. And this was a big part of the Skattebo thesis, which is that it does help with a big back who has some agility and will hit people if you can get him into space, right? Don't actually force these guys to go through the line every time. And his instinctiveness as a receiver is very good. Yep. Now, this doesn't mean he's going to be a Christian McCaffrey, right? McCaffrey, watching that 49ers Cardinals game.
You're talking about the best slot receiver in the NFL?
Oh, my goodness, Colm. Yeah. Basically, if you have McCaffrey and Jake Ferguson on your team this week and you weren't playing old school standard, then you probably annihilated your opponent. But Skattebo here, just looks very good as a receiver. Certainly if he's not competing with Tracy for any length of time, he's going to be just an RB1, right? He's going to be one of those top 12 guys. And that matters. That's really helpful already at this juncture in the season. And this isn't a terrible game where they couldn't move the ball. We talked a lot about the Bears and what does it mean? It basically means that these guys who annihilated collegiate competition, yeah, it's not surprising when you beat the Dallas Cowboys, who are trending in that direction in terms of the quality of their defense, because Russell Wilson, 465 yards or something to that effect last week, 160 in this game, a couple picks. If anything, the 160 sort of overstates it because 61 of those were to Skattebo. Colm, you get 69 yards to Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Malik Neighbors combined. The tricky part about this for Neighbors is that if you have a defense that knows what they're doing, they will be able to take Neighbors away more than we want because of the combination of Russell Wilson only having one throw he can make.
Yeah, well, that's what happened.
And every once in a while, that's great, right? If the Dallas Cowboys are leaving you open for 70-yard touchdowns, yeah, then you're like, yeah, that's the only throw I want, because 70-yard touchdowns score a lot of fantasy points right away. But if that's the only throw and your coordinator just can't do anything. Now, again, there's a lot of context here, and I'm sure that there's a tiny little part of Brian Dable who's like, okay, the Saquon Barkley we've gotten through 3 weeks in 2025, that's the version we had with the Giants. So, please, people, stop giving me a hard time for having ruined, the greatest running back of a generation. I'm sure he's thinking to himself, just wait until Daniel Jones gets a little bit further along with this Colts team and defenses understand like what he and the Colts are trying to do together. And then he'll turn back into a pumpkin as well. And it won't make me look so terrible. But Colm, Brian Daboll should not be the coach of this team. When you have Russell Wilson and Brian Daboll and you face a good defense. The Kansas City Chiefs passing defense is tough, but it can be beaten. The Los Angeles Chargers tore it up in the second half of week 1. The New York Giants right now are a long way from being the Los Angeles Chargers.
Yeah, Shawn, I don't know if you want to hear this bad news, but the next up for the New York Giants is the LA Chargers, who, they're pretty solid defensively as well. So, and they're pretty switched on from that direction. And the other thing I meant to mention on that Bears game, they did talk after the game about that flea flicker being specifically a play that they installed last week because of the Cowboys not being able to defend deep. And then basically I'm sure the Chiefs were similar, where they're like, the only thing Wilson can do is that deep ball. So they've kind of sat 2 men back in coverage the entire time. And then they obviously can't work in those passes in the intermediate or deep ranges. So a tough scene for the Giants and this one.
One of the cool things that they were able to show on Sunday Night Football was essentially this triangle that the Chiefs had around Malik Neighbors all night. And it's not exactly a triple team, but it's sort of a soft triple team. That's going to make it hard to get the ball into your star.
100%. The next one you touched on, Daniel Jones, I suppose it ties in well with the Giants that we're talking about there, but he has 18 of 25, 228, and a touchdown passing. So not huge numbers, but overall an impressive day. Added 27 rushing yards on the ground. But Shawn, the person I want to talk about here is Jonathan Taylor, 17 for 102, 3 rushing touchdowns, has 3 for 16 on 4 targets through the air. Michael Pittman also 6 targets, 6 receptions, 73, and a touch going his way. But like the Titans have all sorts of issues. I think the coaching staff down there is like, when you're talking about the haves and have-not, they unfortunately fit in at the moment to that have-not category. Impressive again to say Ao Manor getting in the end zone. He's 4 for 38 and a touchdown on 5 targets. It's been a really tough season so far for Calvin Ridley. A lot of concern with how obviously the offense is moving the ball and he's not really involved with it. But Shawn, Jonathan Taylor, we talked about him last week, so we probably can just say like what we said last week, +1. We had our kind of conversation around who would be the RB1, rest of season if you were drafting at that point. And I was pretty optimistic, saying like he's kind of in that top 3 at least. And this week he didn't do anything to dampen that expectation going forward. How are you looking at Taylor here as we move into the rest of the season? He is a huge part of the reason why we have gone and won that main event game this week.
Yeah, I love having him on the teams. He looks like, not that we had him dramatically above ADP, but someone who was a target and, like I mentioned, had ranked ahead of Derrick Henry all off season. The thesis with a functional Colts offense is simply that Shane Steichen knows what he's doing. And that's kind of an understatement, right? One of the best offensive coaches in the NFL. And if you could put that together and you could keep him healthy, then you were going to see a 2021-like season. And then you get the first 2 weeks. They're very encouraging, but he does get vultured around the goal line a few times. So the overall touchdowns are down. As soon as you have this game where he's not vultured, it just looks absolutely world-beating, right? And Jonathan Taylor is never going to be one of these guys who is just phenomenal around the goal line. We always talk about him as belonging to this group of big backs who run small, but in a good way. And yet it was encouraging to see him battle at the goal line. There were some plays where, we tend to see him go down and finish.
He doesn't want to give those touchdowns to Daniel Jones, Shawn. That's the extra motivation.
Yeah. When you have the carry from the 1, the carry from the 2, you're hit at the line of scrimmage, and then you need to drive forward. He's not always been the best at that, but he gets in a couple times in this game. And then you also see the legs continue to drive on some carries where he's stopped sort of midfield. And those are the carries that really matter for you when you have Jonathan Taylor, because you're like, Jonathan Taylor's thesis is, all the other stuff is good, and that context can be good. And that's what really can put you over the top, but it's put you over the top because you're also going to get some of these big plays. You get a 46-yard run in this game. Being able to keep the legs going and then get into space, and then I mean, Jonathan Taylor has 4.35 speed.
Yeah.
So once he gets to the second level, very frequently he's gone. I mean, the best. I know I bring this up too often, but one of the reasons why it was so crazy when the Chiefs pass on him is like we just got to watch a college season where every game he's out and he's gone. 50, 60, 70-yard touchdown runs, and then you test with the 4.35 speed at that size. There's nothing fluky about it. Yeah, you're not going to score 50-yard touchdowns every game throughout the course of your NFL career, but having that as something that is part of your profile is such a huge deal. I mean, he's basically having last year's Saquon Barkley season to this point. I mean, nobody's going to be quite as spectacular as Barkley was last year as the whole thing was going on. But Jonathan Taylor, big play machine. If he gets these short yardage touchdowns, Colm, he's going to crush fantasy football.
Yeah, and he's like he's out there pretty much all the time, getting all the usage, and he looks fantastic. The long rush that you mentioned, the agility, the kind of movement, and to get back up to top speed again, very impressive. So I'm excited for this Colts team. Shawn, I think we joked about it last week, but 0-3 for the team of RotoViz Overtime so far this season, the Indianapolis Colts. We haven't settled on the QB name. Shawn wasn't all that much down with Indiana Jones. So we'll see what we do moving forward. Send your name suggestions. Shawn, the next one up here is the Seattle Seahawks. And talking about levels of competition, there wasn't a huge amount of competition here from the New Orleans Saints. The Seattle Seahawks 44, the Saints 13. But I thought that Sam Darnold looked really strong on this. He finishes with only 18 pass attempts, 14 for 18, 218 and 2 touchdowns. But I thought there was some really impressive throws overall. Jaxon Smith-Njigba only has the 6 targets, but 5 receptions, 96 and a touchdown. I thought some of the throws from Darnold in this one made me a lot more confident what I've seen in the last 2 weeks versus what I've seen in week 1. And we did see last year, like there was a lot of good performances, but then you get into situations where, we're talking here about turning back into pumpkins. The playoff performance was kind of living very strong in my head when we were in this offseason. The other player that I thought was impressive in this, Tory Horton, has a long punt return for a touchdown. I believe it was their first punt return since Tyler Lockett done it 10 years ago. So he had the punt return. He also had the receiving touchdown, which I thought was another nice throw and catch, 3 for 32 and a touchdown. Kenneth Walker, Shawn, got the backfield to himself, really, but 16 for 38. So not all that efficient, but does get in the end zone twice as well. Just the 1 reception for 12 yards. But a good kind of fantasy number day. But there was some, I would like to see a little bit more explosiveness, but you're in a situation where the team were also completely out ahead. This one was 38 to 6 at halftime, and it was pretty much over by a couple of minutes into the second quarter. So strange game that way. So it was good to see JSN get to his numbers overall. What do you think of Darnold and this JSN ascension to a true number 1 wide receiver? Is I think it's fully on the tracks at this point.
Yeah, you just wonder how sustainable it is when you're getting 6 targets. But
I also think that that's solely that the next highest targets is Horton with 4. You get Cup with 3. There's only the 18 pass attempts. I don't see it being a situation where they're putting up 44 points on a regular occurrence and then also have 37 or 38 of those by halftime, and the game's can we just finish the game now and not play on? So that would be, if you could get him in the 10 target range every week, I'm pretty confident that there are going to be strong fantasy numbers that follow that.
And the other part about it is that specifically with him, there's going to be this give and take with volume and efficiency, where the only reason that he can stop at 6 is because that first group where you go 5, 96, and 1 is so dynamic. I think you have to love what the coordinator is doing in this one. And it's so tempting to make that same sort of apology / enthusiastic take on Sam Darnold that we had with Russell Wilson a week ago, where really mostly what this is level of competition, where the New Orleans Saints are not a real NFL team. And yet, Darnold was fantastic. You average over 12 yards per attempt. You don't take a sack. You throw the couple touchdowns. When Darnold can play in this context where he's not facing a pass rush, you can run the ball whenever you want, even when you're running ineffectively, because you have the game in control. when there's no pressure on him, he has gotten now to the point. He's moved through his NFL career in a way that he can make these plays. He can make these throws. And certainly with JSN, I mean, just doing the full thing that we talked about, right? You think about the article last year, the article about him this year, and how he's going to become like a CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown type of player. And that's where he is. He looks stunningly good. Even if you are a JSN enthusiast, I mean, this takes you back a little because he's just so dynamic. A 45-yard gain in this one. He's open way down the field. And again, that was part of the thesis, and that was part of the evidence, right? Is that you were going to get more verticality from him. You see it, the ability to separate, the ability to catch, in some cases when it's there, the ability to catch and run. All that's fantastic. It was kind of fun for Kenneth Walker. You do get the touchdowns. You also had some of these sort of quintessential Kenneth Walker plays where he evades, 3 or 4 tackles. You get a couple missed tackles. You get a broken tackle. You look at the end of the run, you're like, he ran 50 yards. It was all sideways. He gained 1 actual yard, but the Kenneth Walker experience is fun. I hope he can stay healthy and score. On the other side column, I really love to see what the Saints are doing, which, I mean, this is a team where you can just go in your shell and be like, we have the worst roster in football. We're just getting it blown out every week. And our whole goal is to be like the Titans and like you somehow mitigate just how bad you look. Now, the Titans haven't been successful in doing that. But the Saints actually went up tempo in the first half of this game. And then they made some mistakes that made them look really bad. But I just want to give credit to a team that isn't good, but is competing and is trying to do some fun things to get better. And I mean, that's what the Saints did in this one. They ended up throwing 39 passes. You get 14 pass attempts to Chris Olave. Now, he only gains 57 yards. It's very empty. But 10 for 57 is better than what some of these teams would be like 3 for 17. Like, they're at least trying to get the ball to their playmakers. It's another game with 8 targets for Juwan Johnson. You have a little bit of involvement from Rashid Shaheed. They get 18 carries to Alvin Kamara. I mean, they're running plays, right? If you want to get out there and practice and get better, try and run some plays. If your team is terrible, instead of like quick kicking, try and do some tempo, get your guys going. I mean, Kamara averages 2.3 yards per carry. The Seahawks defense had them completely overwhelmed. Kamara probably isn't going to end up being a good fantasy pick. The flip side of all these targets to Olave is that Kamara is not involved in the receiving game for the first time, which essentially just wipes him out as a fantasy viable piece. But as badly as they were beaten, you still saw some fun things from Spencer Rattler, and you saw competitiveness from Kellen Moore. I prefer to see that than teams just acting like when you see teams where it seems like the head coach's thesis is that he doesn't like football and just wants the games to end. It's like there are other things you can do if you don't like football. The Saints look like they want to play football, and that's a good sign.
Going to go a bit rapid fire here, Shawn, before we finish up. And my question here is this actually a thing? Is it real? And I think I have one here that is a thing, one that might be a thing, and 2 that you're probably just going to laugh when I mention. So we're going to start off, though, with Tory Horton. He gets in the end zone in this one. We mentioned the limited sample across the game in terms of the pass attempts. Do we see this as him becoming a legitimate like flex option as we move forward here? Or is it a case that, this is just the 1 week and let's see what happens?
Well, Ben and I took him out on our RV Triflex Dynasty team Sunday morning, so that was disappointing. Yeah, I mean, Tory Horton is for real as a reality player. The volume isn't going to be there to ever comfortably start him in fantasy, but this was the other part with the Cooper Kupp issue and why he was basically completely off our board. You think back even to early in prospect season when we had Travis on, and Travis is like, Tory Horton can play. And both Travis, the evidence, and Horton himself are like, I'm really athletic. And when you have that background, you have the athleticism. I mean, this was a draft steal by the Seahawks.
Definitely wanted to check if he's on any of your waivers this coming week. Shawn, Tyquan Thornton, getting some deep targets. We can definitely say that. He had a long of 49 last week, a long of 33 this week. He gets the 71 and a touchdown, but he had 9 targets this week, 5 targets last week. Is this a thing?
It depends a little bit on just how injured the three main guys are. And I know some people are going to push back and be like, well, Hollywood Brown is one of the main three. He's not, right? It's Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and Jalen Royals. I don't think it can be a thing for the Chiefs if they want to be decent. They did not gap or embarrass, certainly they embarrassed the Giants, but embarrassed themselves at the same time, which isn't the direction you really want to be as the Kansas City Chiefs. But Tyquan Thornton, I believe, tested to a 4.28 at the combine, which means you could absolutely fly. If you're talking about running down the field, occasionally getting open, in part because teams are a little skeptical of Patrick Mahomes' ability to push the ball and Andy Reid's willingness to call like any good plays. And where's Andy Reid's genius? I mean, these plays are bad, Colm. I mean, even when you're talking about all replacement level players, I mean, these are also bad plays. I'm excited for him that he's had some good games. Now, the thing that was interesting about this one, and again, it was a Sunday night game, so everyone will have seen it, but he has the terrible drop where that ball is dropped into him to catch, go in the end zone. He goes to the ground instead, and then the ball comes free. You could even probably make the case that he had that ball pinned and it should count. I do think it was incomplete and properly adjudicated there. And then
I believe they basically ran the same play a couple of plays later, and they did catch up on it.
And he makes a play on the ball. And that time, it reinforces just how difficult and interesting and chaotic sports are, that you can have an uncontested, easy touchdown and drop it, and then have a very difficult play where the defender's arm is also in there, a ball that should not be caught, and you make a highlight grab and you get your team in the position that you need. I'm excited for him. I don't think it's going to continue on at all, but 571-1 for a guy who completely failed with the Patriots and looked like he might not ever get any of these big plays on the NFL stage. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool, and to see him get into a role, even if it's just the case, you get an opportunity at the NFL level, you have to take it, and for him to have bounced to another team and then given an opportunity due to injuries and to take it so far is good. But the issue kind of you've hinted at there is he's going to get squeezed again as those players come back in. Somebody, Shawn, who may not necessarily get squeezed from other directions. He had 8 targets last week. He had 9 targets this week. The difference, Shawn, this week is that he received 8 of them for 145 and 3 touchdowns. I'm talking about Trey Tucker. Can Trey Tucker be a thing? Because he gets in the end zone as well against the Patriots in week 1 with 54 yards in that one. But this one may be one that we look back and this may be the career peak game.
Well, this will be the career peak game. I have
Trey Tucker on 2 dynasty rosters that I did not start this week, and I was like, man, Trey Tucker would look good in those fantasy lineups.
Oh my goodness. He would look absolutely fantastic. The Washington Commanders pretended he was invisible. They didn't cover him at all. Broken coverage, Trey Tucker long touchdown, broken coverage. I mean,
this was kind of that thing I mentioned at the start. There was a lot of them defensively or missed field goals where I'm like, is this the Twilight Zone? But those touchdowns, I'm like, I wonder will they cover him the next time? Geno, just throw it down to him.
Geno Smith. He's got so much arm talent, and you can see that on some of these Trey Tucker plays. One of the things that is worth tracking as a fantasy manager, and it creates this wider range of outcomes where you're Geno Smith, you're in that bad situation last year with the Seahawks where you're facing a ton of pressure. You can really only make your first read, but you're so good at figuring out where the ball should go and then getting it out. The thing that frustrates me with Geno is that you don't seem to get the ability to move through progressions. And if the defense is taking away your main guy, you don't have the ability to then get that player the ball, right? So the flip side of this Trey Tucker game is that the Raiders were blown out basically from the start, and yet they're unable to get the ball to Jakobi Meyers. Jakobi Meyers, someone I always underrate in fantasy, in part because of games like this, but in part because it's hard to want to buy someone who probably can't, jump to the second, third, fourth round next year. And you're trying to build your teams in a way that even late, you're grabbing guys like a Luther Burden who over the second half of the fantasy season can have such a massive impact that you win because of that. Jakobi Meyers is good. I should draft him more often. He should not be in a game like this where the Raiders get blown out and he only has 4 targets. It's even much more egregious when you look at Brock Bowers and you're like 4 for 38, 5 targets. When the defense shows a look that takes him away, Geno Smith is not a good guy for distributing the ball to those stars. He's not someone like a Kyler Murray who can't do any of the things Geno can do, but will like scramble around a little bit and throw the ball to Trey McBride. That part has been pretty frustrating. This Brock Bowers performance was demoralizing because he looked very spry out there. We didn't see a lot of leftover issues from that injury like we might have a week ago. They do try and get him the early touchdown. He has that end zone target where, in part because he's completely covered, he doesn't look for the ball soon enough and doesn't elevate up. The ball essentially gets knocked away by the opponent's helmet. Yeah, the good news here, if you are a Geno fan or an Ashton Genty fan or a Myers fan or a Bowers fan, I don't think too many teams in the future are going to be able to pretend that Trey Tucker is not on the field. Like, this is an 11-player grouping. You have to cover Trey Tucker. Trey Tucker, another one of these guys with elite speed. And so if you just don't cover him at all, they're going to be long touchdowns. That should open some things up for the true playmakers on this roster.
Yeah, we might even get the Raiders into the panic meter show when we do that later this week. But Shawn, Marcus Mariota putting up a big win, a big spot to get the Commanders to 2-1. That was one of the cooler things this week as well. The final player I want to hit on, Shawn, though, is Quentin Johnston, somebody, a former favorite of ours, I will put out there, but he has started the season 14 receptions off 24 targets, 239 yards and 3 touchdowns. Doesn't get in the end zone this week, but he has 10 targets, 6 receptions for 89. Had the 2 touchdowns obviously against the Chiefs in week 1, had a touchdown and 71 yards last week. This looks like a true breakout here in terms of how they're using him. They're also using Keenan Allen very strongly in terms of how he's being used and the production that he's having. Got in the end zone again this week. I mentioned at the start of the show he got in the end zone last week because he was the guy that put us under in the main event. But we'll talk about Lad McConkey specifically on the next show on the panic meter. But Quentin Johnston, Shawn, still 24 years old. Looks like this is... They've decided to use him to his skill set and to try and give him the ball in ways that is advantageous for him to produce. True breakout?
I think we still have to probably wait a bit more, but I don't think there's too much question that Quentin Johnston can be a viable NFL player. This is a weird game because the Chargers eke it out, but they eke it out on the back of running 80 plays to 48 for the Broncos. The Broncos did some things, including, I think, committing a penalty on a punt, extending a Chargers drive to just eliminate their ability to have plays in the game. They did average almost a full yard more per play. The Chargers would probably tell you, okay, Justin Herbert took the 5 sacks, but we also outperformed them from a first down perspective, from a keeping the drive alive perspective, 29-9. So
Justin Herbert threw the ball 22 times more in this than Bo Nix, and they ran the ball 7 more times in total versus the Denver offense. Like, they ran a lot more offense. But they also, the one thing that's been surprising so far with the Chargers is how much they've been willing to go with Justin Herbert and to go through the pass game. So I'm also thinking that the volume that the receivers are getting, it's not going to be 47 pass attempts every week, but I think that they're going to stay in a reasonable range.
Yeah, and the injury to Najee Harris really does unlock Omari and Hampton. He was inefficient as a runner again, but gets in the end zone. Part of what the Denver Broncos do defensively is allow you to throw to the backs. And so we had this somewhat unlikely performance based on how we sort of expect the Chargers to run their offense, where Hampton has 6 for 59. He was obviously one of the big winners of the week. I mean, I'm frustrated with the Quentin Johnston thing because we're pretty good at sticking with our guys who, just get creamed basically by the media and by fantasy analysts and pundits and what have you. There was all of this after the NFL draft and with the poor rookie season where it's like, oh, everybody should have known that Quentin Johnston was not a first-round pick and that the Chargers made this huge reach. And obviously, they don't know what they're doing because, he's a manufactured touch guy. He can't catch the ball. He can't, do what an NFL receiver needs to do. Different players are going to have some different strengths and weaknesses. And yes, there are first-round busts, but Quentin Johnston did not have that type of profile. Right now, if you're going to say there are some things he doesn't do as well as other first-round receivers or other starting receivers in the NFL, that is true. But he's also a guy who is extremely athletic, who is very good after the catch, and who also gives you some verticality. Now, would you prefer maybe someone like a Keenan Allen or maybe someone like a Ladd McConkey who can deliver those over-the-middle key, third down converting plays, the ones that require elite route running, that maybe require you to catch the ball and take a big hit? Yeah, that's the difference-making kind of play. And Johnston probably doesn't give you that. But the way that the NFL currently works, there is a huge role for guys who catch and then run with the ball well. There is a huge role for long athletes who are fast, who can take the top off a defense and create a big play. Quentin Johnston can do those things. And it seems like the team believes in it because the volume has really been there. And you can even go back to the 13 catch performance at the tail end of last season to see where all of this is going from a volume perspective. I mean, obviously, they're not going to throw 47 passes every week. And I don't think that Quentin Johnston is probably going to be a league winner. It's probably more that Keenan Allen is going to be that. And yet, this is cool. I love what's happening for Quentin Johnston.
So that is where we're going to finish up this one. We'll come back with the panic meter later this week. Make sure you're subscribed to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed to get that once it's available. Shawn, we almost hit 60 minutes here. That's a long time, unless it was a draft show. I think that we got over the 1 hour. So hopefully people have enjoyed it. If you have done so, please click that subscribe button. And also you can leave us a written review on your favorite podcast app. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on socials at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of Shawn's work up at rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.